Can you hear me?
Thank you for joining us today. This public accountability meeting is going to be focused on public contact. Public contact relates to the multitude of conversations that take place between the police and the public every day. This covers face-to-face encounters, reporting crime, or incidents via the 999 or non-emergency 101 numbers, online through digital channels, or the correspondence between investigating officers and victims of crime in relation to ongoing cases. Public accountability meetings are one of the platforms I use to track progress against priorities in my police crime and justice plan. They are designed to promote openness and transparency in my work and allow me to hold the Chief Constable and the force to account on the public's behalf. As in previous meetings, we will set aside time to respond to questions that have been raised by the public in advance. These will be answered directly by the Chief Constable or senior colleagues later. I would like to thank everyone who has contributed a question to today's meeting. These meetings do help us learn lessons and identify any problems that impact on the quality of service residents receive. I can also assure you that where necessary, the issues raised are scrutinised in greater detail beyond the confines of this meeting. It was clear to me when I was first elected in 2021 that public satisfaction levels in call answering were not what they should be. Our call operators are the gatekeepers to the force and have a real critical role to play in how positively the police are perceived. Any failure to meet these expectations undermines public confidence and trust. I assured residents at the time I would deliver change and have continued to prioritise this issue in my new police crime and justice plan. Over the past 4 years, call handling has remained under intense scrutiny from my office. I've spent time shadowing call handlers in the control room to understand how they operate and also the volume and type of calls they receive. From this work, we've trialled new approaches to improve effectiveness and efficiency. They have been backed up with substantial investment in advanced technology and recruitment to deliver a more customer-focused service that I felt was necessary and needed for a 21st century police force. Key upgrades include a 1.5 million cloud-based telephony system that addresses the transfer delays, giving operators more time to answer calls. The expansion of switchboard operating times, a new switchboard triage system, and a new 24/7 non-emergency chat service. And more recently, the launch of an online reporting platform. I know that most residents want to talk to a real person at the end of the phone when they report an incident or a non-urgent crime. But equally, a growing number of people prefer to report non-urgent crimes online in their own time. Communication has changed with the advance of technology, and policing has had to adjust to increase the opportunities for digital interaction. Our move to a single online home last year has been really successful, with growing numbers of people reporting non-urgent crimes online. This indicates increasing confidence to report crime online. It has also helped to reduce call traffic into the control room, freeing up resources to deal with other priorities. This is important, given that Durham Constabulary consistently receives a higher number of 101 calls per 1,000 population than other forces across England and Wales. The impact of these changes has been substantial, with both 999 and 101 calls seeing sustained reductions in answering times. The presentation will cover this in detail, but I'd just like to take a moment to recognise the phenomenal commitment of our switchboard and control room staff. They have worked exceptionally hard to embrace and implement these changes, and our communities are really seeing the results. We will do more, and my office is working hard to raise awareness of inappropriate emergency calls and where best to direct non-urgent inquiries to the police. This work is ongoing, and I will update you again on this progress in the future. All of my public accountability meetings have been recorded and are available on YouTube for public viewing, and a link can be found on my office's website. A full recording of this meeting will be available shortly to enable residents to see exactly how the accountability process works. Before we start, we're going to have some brief introductions from the Force executive team. And for this morning's session, I will invite Chief Constable Rachel Bacon to say a few words and provide some operational context and information. There will then be a presentation by Assistant Chief Constable Richie Allen. I will then take questions that you want, and I will ask the questions that you want answering. I will now hand over to Chief Constable Rachel Bacon to do introductions before we start the session.
Good morning, Joy, and thank you to those who are joining us today. So if I run round the room here, introduce yourselves, please.
Hi, Julie Diamond, Assistant Chief Officer.
Sheena Irwin, Head of Command for Corporate Development.
I'm John McAdam, Assistant Chief Constable.
Morning, everybody. Richie Allen, Assistant Chief Constable.
Morning, everybody. Kieran Irvin, Deputy Chief Constable.
Lovely, thank you very much. I'm grateful to be given this opportunity to discuss how we engage with our communities of County Durham and Darlington. Contact between the police and the public helps to build trust and confidence and provides reassurance that we will be there when people need us most. How we choose to engage with each other allows for a more effective response, and we know that this changes as technology and digital capability grows. Communities expect the police to be on hand and visible to help keep them safe, prevent crime, and respond quickly when a crime takes place. And this is really important to all of us. The Force Control Room remains at the centre for receiving and responding to such calls for service from our communities. But in a fast-paced digital world, our communities expect the police to be as accessible and responsive as possible. This also includes being able to hear about community concerns and providing prompt information. Therefore, policing has had to move with the times and find other ways for our communities to speak to the police. Of course, 999 when you really need help and 101 remain the most popular routes. However, we have advanced to online reporting to ensure we meet the demand in a most efficient way that's suitable for people. Shortly, we will hear from Assistant Chief Constable Richie Allen, who will go through in more detail how we engage and respond to our communities. This will include the introduction of a portal which provides two-way communication between the public and the police. And this is really important to me. It's not just about us talking, it's about us listening. We recognise that it's becoming increasingly difficult to respond to all calls for service as demand increases. However, we remain committed to looking for ways to improve and welcome any feedback you may have. Thank you for your time, and I'll now hand over to ACC Richie Allen. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Commissioner, for the introduction. I will just get the presentation up. Somebody can just be so good to let me know when it goes. I'm going to share the screen first, and then we should.
Yep, it's going.
Fantastic, right? Okay, and then somebody can tell me once I move on to my first slide that it's actually moved. We're good to go. So yeah, good morning, everybody. As mentioned in my introduction, Assistant Chief Constable Richie Allen, and on behalf of the Chief Constable through the Force Executive, I have the strategic lead for public contact. I'll very briefly just talk about the command structure that we have in our Force Control Room, and that's really where all of our public contact sits, just because I think it's important just to show the investment that we have in that area of our service. So structurally, the command that our control room sits in is headed by a chief superintendent with a superintendent working to them. And then we have a dedicated chief inspector and a dedicated senior leader who's a police staff member who then run the control room. And to just give some very brief context then in terms of the size and scale of that, we have 4 teams who obviously work on a shift pattern to deliver the 24-hour service that we talk around call handling, dealing with those 999 calls, 101, and some of the other methods of contact that have been referenced both by the chief and the commissioner in their introduction. Those teams have about 40 people on them each. That's 4 teams of 40 to do that. And I'll start talking throughout the presentation as well about our virtual investigation team, and they sit with 30 members of staff. So it just gives you a bit of an idea of scale. And just to reiterate a point that was made by both Chief and the Commissioner, I'll talk a lot in the presentation about alternate means of contact. This is about choice for the public. It's not about trying to push the public necessarily down one route over another. It's about us being able to best serve our communities as possible and making sure that they have choice in terms of how they contact the organisation. So that looks as though that slide's moved on. If that's the case, I'm confident that we're good to go on the presentation. Fabulous. So we have 4 primary methods of contact into our force control room. So those first 2 there are what we might consider a more traditional route, whereby when it's a non-emergency, people can call 101, and unless they stipulate otherwise, if that call's identified as being made within the force area, they'll be diverted into Durham Constabulary's control room. Obviously, the alternate to that is 999 when it's an emergency situation, and I'll talk through those 2 in a little bit more detail, because we do sometimes get asked about when should I call 999 over when should I call 11101. So that should hopefully give people a bit more clarity. And then those last 2, which I'll go into a little bit more detail as we go through the presentation, just show some of those digital options that we've started to invest a lot more heavily in, just to reflect that societal change about how people want to contact their local police service. And throughout the presentation as well, I'll talk a bit about our performance in all of those areas, and I'll just give people a flavour of some of the future looks, of some of the work that we've got in train to make that level of service even better. And again, simply to echo the chief's sentiments, the feedback for us is really important on this. I know it's part of the Commissioner's plan and obviously part of the Chief Constable's delivery plan as well, about how we specifically respond to our communities. So just moving on to the next slide. So in terms of those 2 ways of reporting crime and ASB to the police through the telephone route, so 999 and 101 are for different situations, as we cover off there. So that 999 call really is when it's an emergency. And we would group it into those 4 primary areas that are covered there. So we're thinking about that immediate danger to life, when there's violence or threats of violence being used. If there's a crime occurring now, so by means of example as shown there, a burglary, or when something's occurred but the suspect's still on the scene, that's when we'd really encourage our communities to call 999, because that diverts the call as a priority call into the force control room, and it just allows us to get officers on the scene as quick as possible to deal with those situations. So that little bit at the bottom there maybe might help people in terms of where there's that immediate risk to life, safety or property, please use 999. In terms then of when to call 101, this is really when something may well have happened. So a crime might have already happened, but it's not ongoing at the moment. So that might be that if somebody finds that they've been a victim of a crime, of something that's occurred overnight, and sometimes examples of that are things like vehicle crime. It may be when you want to report some suspicious activity, but it's not urgent. So again, it's probably not ongoing now, or it's something that might have been ongoing for a while, but you want to tell the police about it because you quite rightly feel that it's something that we should know and something that we can act upon. Likewise, if you've got some information to pass on about a crime or suspect, then it's 101. And in some cases, we might have dedicated call lines for that, depending upon the gravity of an offence. Again, just to ensure that that 999 line is really clear for those emergencies. And lastly, if you want to get advice or speak to your local police or concerns about something that's going on in the area. And that's really important to us as well, because I'll talk a couple of times through the presentation just about how we get what we call community intelligence, and our pledges around the neighbourhood policing guarantee are really important around that. Our dedicated neighbourhood policing teams, they want to know what's going on in the area, because their primary job is to tackle those issues that are occurring in their area. You'll see there as well that we now have some alternate methods. So the online reporting via our website, and you can see the graphic in the bottom right of this screen on the presentation slide, which if you go to the Durham Constabulary website, you hit with those banners, and it's the report one where you can report issues in. And again, we also have live chat. So that sits in that same website, and you'll just see it in the bottom right where there's a little almost speech bubble with lines in, and that's where you can report things via live chat. And you'll see there that we aim to either create instance within 2 hours, or where it's via live chat, to get back to those members of the public who are reporting things within that 2-hour time frame. So just to give an idea of the volumes of calls that we deal with, Commissioner, I know that you mentioned in your introduction about that 101 demand being very high for the force. Like I said, in the sense of giving the community more options to dial 101 or to report non-emergency incidents, we've actually in the last 12 months seen a 10.9% decrease in emergency calls. And when we compare that against a national decrease of 2.4%, that's a real promising thing for me, and starts to give me that real confidence that we're getting sustained options for our communities to report by alternative methods. Just of note as well, of those non-emergency calls, approximately 31% of them result in an incident being created, and I'll go into some of the reasons for that further into the presentation. One thing that we're always really keen to track and keep an eye on is what we call the abandonment rate for 101. So we fluctuate between about 8 and 13% of our 101 calls being what we would call abandoned. And that's simply where a caller might hang up, and that's sort of data from the last 2 years or so. It's something that I'm really keen to understand, and again, I'll talk about some of the ways that we're looking to really get into the detail on that, because what we don't want to obviously do is have members of the public who want to contact the police, but perhaps through frustration, if it's around waiting times, decide that they want to hang up, because we really need to get that community intelligence from our public. So I'll give some indications later on in the presentation about what we're doing in relation to that, because that's a really important metric for me in terms of my strategic role in this area. The 999 demand it's interesting. So we've seen an 11% increase over the last 12 months in the volume of 999 calls. Again, doing some work to understand that, and there's lots of reasons, from some very straightforward things like, this summer was much warmer than last summer, and I'd like to say on occasions it's more sophisticated than that. It can just not be. It can be weather dependent. But what we have seen, and Commissioner, you were gracious enough to mention it in your introduction, we've really seen some improvements in our 999 call handling. So as a national indicator, all police forces are held to account to answer 90% of 999 calls in 10 seconds or under. This is a much improved picture for the constabulary. So when I think of this year alone, January to April, we were averaging 84% of that. So accepting we're not where we wanted to be around that, getting 90% plus, but actually April to June did see us achieve 92% of our 999 calls being answered within that 10-second parameter. And to maybe give a comparator to where we were for this time last year, some of those call handling times were sitting in the high 70%. So it's something that we were really, really keen to improve our performance on. So I'm really pleased to see that it's heading in the right direction and is a success story for us. Just briefly referencing that sort of importance of the difference between a 999 call and a 101 call. It is quite noteworthy that when we compare and combine both 999 and 101, what we do find is that approximately 6 out of 10 of those calls don't actually result in an incident being created. And of those 999 calls, that's still about just over 4 in 10 don't result in an incident being created. So it just helps to emphasize why we need to try and get that education around the difference between 999 and 101. So I mentioned that it's really important for us to know what's sitting in those non-incident calls, and just by means of some explanations as to what that is. So some of the calls that count as a 101 call are dealt with through our interactive voice response. These will be really familiar to people, regardless of whether you've had to call the police or not. If you sort of called other telephony-based services, so think of your insurance company, and that's where you can use a voice activation to get your call diverted to the right area. So that basically is a good thing for us with the what we call IVR, that interactive voice response, because it means that we can divert calls into the right area without the call handler being tied up, which then frees them to deal with those 101 calls and 999 calls critically, where we really need to speak to our communities. And you'll see there just there's a large number of those contacts come from members of the public wanting to speak to officers about an individual issue, or some inquiries into certain departments. And I'll go into a little bit of detail later about what we've done just to divert them. So making sure that the public still get to answer the query that they called up for, but they do so without having to speak to a call handler to divert into those departments. So we mentioned at the start about single online home, and this has been a real increase for us in terms of seeing a huge increase in online reporting, as you can see there, and we've had a lot of uptake compared to other national forces. I would argue in that case we have more to do with regards to it. And this starts to explain why we're starting to see some of that traditional 101 demand reducing. And this is, again, just reflective of society, isn't it? People are erring much more to a preference of being able to do things online at their own time, in their own leisure, and it affords them an opportunity to do that. But whilst reiterating, I accept it's not for everybody, and 101 is there for people who might not be digitally enabled to do that, or might not have the confidence. What I would say is, though, in terms of, you know, if you don't have that confidence, I would just encourage you to have a look at the website, because it is very intuitive. It really walks you through it. But we're starting to see an increase in that single online home, which I think is a real positive thing for us. And then likewise, that live chat. And again, this is something that people will be really familiar with, where you're having that sort of conversation with people almost by an instant message, by instant messaging, and we're seeing an increase in that. And again, that's reducing the demand in relation to 101. you'll see there as well that we're tending to get those answered with a chat agent, and that's somebody who works in the control room in about 60 seconds. So that's hopefully gives people confidence that that's a really good way to contact us as well, especially where it's that non-emergency incident. And I think this just, like I say, just reiterates that same thing, is we need to just try and get as many different means for the public to be able to contact us as they deem fit, because we're their service, so it's important for us to do that. So in terms of My Durham portal and My Durham journey, so these are basically what we call those opportunities for people to have digital contact with us. So My Durham portal is used for certain crime types where people can get updates by logging into a portal, and they can see things like the progress of an investigation. Officers can send messages to victims, and critically, as the Chief said in her introduction, we can make sure that we're hearing the voice of our victims as well, because again, linking it back to that Chief Constable's delivery plan about our real focus on victims and victim satisfaction, we think that this is a really positive thing to have that more digitally enabled connectivity with those victims for who this works best. And you'll see there some of the figures on the screen where we're starting to get an increased usage of that. In future, we're likely to increase the number of criminal offences that we use that for, but we did just want to make sure that we were comfortable as we introduced it. We didn't want to go really big and disappoint victims of crime if there were teething problems when we've introduced that, but it's working really well for us. The public really do seem to like it and engage with it, so we look to have expansion for that. And the My Durham journey, that's effectively where people have been reporting incidents. So again, it just reiterates that this is starting to become a much more used tool by the public there, and people hopefully can see those figures on the screen. That just shows that it's becoming a much bigger part of how we police our communities. It's important just to talk about some of the investment that we've put into the force control room. And Commissioner, you did mention it at the start, and obviously I know that from the office there was a lot of investment that was through preset promises, which we directly brought into the force control room. So we've had an uplift of 10 extra call handlers. I mean, I would sort of quote that as being a real game changer for us. So when I go back to that significant improvement in 999 call handling, that's undoubtedly attributable to having more people working within our force control room. And again, I gave you that scale at the start, didn't I, about just how many people we have actually working in there. We've increased the size of our virtual investigation teams, and I'll talk a little bit about that very, very shortly. I've mentioned some of the process changes that we've covered off there, so particularly the single online home and the live chat. We've also changed some of the training for our force control room staff, so they hit the ground quicker but more ready. And that's been, again, another real important thing for us, that when we get people new into the organisation in the force control room, we really get them into the control room as quick as possible. And Commissioner, you know, thank you for the acknowledgement of the work that they do. I have tremendous respect for our force call handlers, because it really is a tough gig, but an incredibly rewarding job for our staff, because they often are the first point of our communities when they're in real crisis. We've also improved some of our crime recording through that virtual investigation team. And Commissioner, you mentioned at the start a lot of the investment in some of our technology. So we've updated our software. So Cortex, if you look in that middle graphic where you've got process, and you can see a member of the control room looking at those 4 or 5 screens that they're surrounded with, That's effectively the control room system that they operate. And Smart Storm, that's the call incident recording log that we use. So they've both had investment to make sure that we're operating on the latest versions. You've seen that investment around the digital contact as being really important. And Commissioner, you referenced at the start that in the early part of this year, we went onto our new telephony platform, going live in February 2025. So yes, that gave us a further opportunity to make some gains in our call handling, but also crucially gave us some real stability around the platform that technology sits on. So in terms of just a bit of a current work and future look in terms of what we're doing and what we'll be moving into, you'll see there that we're a pilot force taking part in a Home Office national automated triage solution. So to give a dead quick example of that, if, for example, a member of the community calls the police to report fly tipping, actually fly tipping is dealt with our partners in the local authority. They have the right level of investigators for that, and the powers to deal with that sits under local authority powers as opposed to police powers. But understandably, that a member of the community might think that it's something that the police would deal with. So through this pilot, if somebody says that they wish to report fly tipping in this example, what would happen is that automated triage solution would then divert that call into our respective partners in the two local authorities that we cover. So that's an example of what that is. Obviously, as society uses more with artificial intelligence, likewise, we're looking at some opportunities that may sit there. And there's some national work that we're closely tied into just to see how we can effectively increase our AI solutions. So it's people saying like, hey Siri, where you almost just verbalize what you want, and through automation and an intelligent automation product that we get answers to our communities. In terms of that improved public experience, as I mentioned at the early part of the presentation, where a lot of that 101 call demand can go into that 101 system when people just want to speak to an officer. So we've now launched a new 0191 number, and then with the officer's collar number, we can direct people to the officer's team account, which if they're on duty and available, they'll answer that, but otherwise gives members of the public an opportunity to record messages which officers can get back to them with when they're next on duty. And a future look, something that we're looking at is social media reporting. So we've spoken there about, people coming to our website. We're looking at other opportunities through social media reporting. So a little bit early in terms of dipping our toe in the water with that. But again, it's just really trying to think of ways to be as accessible as possible to all of our communities. I mentioned again, in terms of really understanding our data better and a direct correlation back to the Chief Constable's delivery plan in terms of really being data-led and really having digital inclusivity across the force. So we're developing a data dashboard, and that's in testing now and looks really good, really strong, which will help inform some of our performance. We've been working with BT, who provide our telephony platform as well, just to try and understand some of the more bespoke areas of performance within the control room. And you'll see there, and I've referenced it, that further expansion by working with Salesforce, who are the provider of the victims portal and journey modules that we've looked at. And lastly, just on this one, we're also looking at implementing a new shift pattern to try and be even more demand-led in our control room. We currently have what we call targeted hours, where we do bring people in for our peak areas of demand, just to try and ensure that we have consistency around our call handling. But we're just having a further look to see what improvements, if any, may exist out there in relation to that. So I will breathe and pause there for questions. I think, Commissioner, if I'd probably just come off and stop sharing, that should bring us all back, and then we can take the questions that have been posed. I'm not sure if any other colleagues from the exec want to just chip in with anything in terms of what was covered in the presentation.
I can't hear Joy. Can you hear Joy?
Yeah.
Joy, shall we just start the questions while someone's trying to sort your tech out? Okay, brilliant. So shall I read that out then, the first question? Okay. I've mostly found the response to 101 and 999 calls has been very good over many years, and I also like the effective use of social media as a way to engage with the police. But it concerns me that too many comments on the Facebook page are unhelpful at best, defamatory at worst. What do the force intend to do to address this to ensure the public feels safe engaging in this way?
No, thank you for that question.
I think I was going to pick that one up first, just to give Richie a bit of a breath.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
He's been speaking a lot there. And this one sort of cuts across not just public contact, but also in terms of how we manage, the force's media position across a whole range of areas. And just to give reassurance, we do have monitoring software in place that will root out inappropriate language, so profanity, and you can imagine the words that sometime are posted by people on social media platforms. So we can pull those words out and hide comments that contain anything that might be seen to be derogatory towards either parts of the community or indeed individuals. And we update this as we go, as new language and new thoughts come forward. So we're quite proactive in that space. We work to monitor comments as they come through, but that is very much based on best efforts. We're not set up to monitor social media accounts 24/7, but we are able to monitor and draw comments out, and also when we get individuals who routinely go on our outlets and post defamatory content, we are able to block them as individuals. There is, however, a balance around that. Of course, we are bound a lot by contempt of court regulations and the law in that regard. So we do turn comments off when somebody's been charged to prevent any potential contempt issues that come forward. The other side to that, though, is it's important to allow members of the public to make comments in certain circumstances, because that might well be valuable in relation to the incident that's been reported. But also, if you turn comments off all the time, that of its nature restricts the reach of the posts, and it's trying to find that balanced position of making sure we get the messages out in the best possible way, but at the same time ensure that there's a professionalized response to commentary and comments that sort of overstep the mark.
Thank you very much, Kieran. And yeah, good, very good update. Thank you. So we're going to move then on to the second question. I'm getting increasingly concerned about the number of young men riding powerful electric bikes capable of very high speeds, particularly in urban areas. I've reported the presence of these individuals many times, and so have many other residents, but the problem continues. Ringing 101 is a waste of time due to the long delay in getting an answer, and the riders have long gone. How do you plan to address this? Who's going to answer this one for us?
I'll pick that one up.
Okay.
Had a sip of water, so I'm good to go again.
Lovely. Thank you, Richie.
No, and thank you. It's a really good question to be able to address actually this one, because we are seeing an increase in this specific issue being reported across the county, and I understand some of the frustrations and of course risks that may be felt by those people in our communities. Hopefully I've given some reassurance around the methods of contacting the force in my presentation in terms of that 101 answer time and alternative means of contact. Of course, though, I accept that when we do respond to these incidents, it can quite often be the case that people have moved on prior to officers' arrival. But that public call about the instance at the scene is really valuable to us, because what it helps do is just build up our intelligence picture of what's going on in our communities. And then that really helps us to inform our targeted policing operations. So those things are picked up at a local level by our dedicated neighbourhood policing teams, and they'll look at long-term approaches. They'll look at trying to identify people who may be committing offences or antisocial behaviour on, in this example, those e-bikes. Furthermore, we have a force-wide operation in relation to this, which is called Operation Endurance. And that works with, obviously, the force, our bike section, and we work in partnership with, and particularly our local authorities to tackle these issues. So very recently, our motorbike section's been equipped with stingers, which are those sort of, I think, nails, if you want to call them in straightforward language, that are rolled out across road. I'm sure everybody's seen them, that deflate tyres. So that's the more accurate way of putting it, but in terms of that visual. So that's a tactical option that we can use where appropriate if we do identify people in the situation described. We do a lot of education around this as well, in terms of working with schools to engage with students to warn them about the dangers of this as well. And we work closely with other national policing bodies to ensure that we're as informed as possible, and we're making sure that our responses are as accurate and current as they can be. Furthermore, with our neighbourhood policing teams who do look at this, and this becomes a real part of their daily business, we're soon to introduce a new antisocial behaviour recording system that, again, will start to really help us to have a greater picture of where these issues are occurring, so that we can make sure that we've got our visibility and our resources in the right place.
Thank you, Richie, for that answer. Moving on to question 3. I saw a post on social media that there is now a faster 999 response, and 92% of emergency calls were answered in under 10 seconds, which is up from 77% last year. However, when I rang 999 to report an incident, yes, the call was answered fairly quickly, but by the time this incident had stopped. Why did it take 7 days for officers to get to the scene to see what happened? The impact this has was huge on not just my family, but those around in the neighbourhood, given it was physical assault by a neighbour across the road.
I'll pick that one up. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you.
I think in the first instance, I'll be honest, it appears like we've let this person down, and to that end, I'm sorry, because it sounds as though there's been a report of an assault, and if it has taken us 7 days to get there, I'm sorry. We would really strive to hold ourselves to better standards to that. And maybe as an aside, Andrea, if you do happen to have the details of the member of the public who passed this one in, I'll ensure that we look into it. But maybe if I explain how the system does work, and I do scrutinise this, so I'm confident that we get it far more right than wrong. So when an instance called into the control room, we use an acronym called THRIVE to grade the call, and THRIVE means threat, harm, risk, investigation, vulnerability, and engagement, to understand what type of response to give that call. And then basically any call falls into 3 categories. One being an immediate response, so that's where we go straight out, and that's often when you'll see police vehicles, obviously with blue lights on and sirens, and we aim to be at the scene of that from point of call to within 20 minutes. Where it's a priority call, so where it's not as urgent as an immediate, but we do want to get there quickly, we aim to be on scene within 2 hours. Some of our then longer term responses, we aim to be there within 48 hours, or have some contact with within 48 hours. Sadly, sometimes we do have situations where demand outstrips our response to be able to achieve those targets, but it is something that we closely monitor to ensure that there's no performance slippage except in those extreme circumstances. One of the things that we've been looking to do, and I did reference this in the presentation, was around the growth of this virtual investigation team. And in essence, what we're really looking to do with that is those calls where we don't attend straight away, either as an immediate or as a priority response, that this virtual investigation team will contact all victims of crime within a 24-hour period and be able to speak to victims, find the incident, ensure that we get the victim what we call the victim contract right, which is something that we have to do in line with the victim codes of practice. And then we can determine the most appropriate way of dealing with it after that point. So it may be that the crime gets closed at that point, or it may get passed out to the most appropriate investigator, who will then have, if you want to call it, a secondary level of contact with the victim after that initial recording. So that's something that's really new to us. It only came in the beginning of October, so keeping a really close eye on that. But hopefully that will really improve that feeling of the victim being able to have their crime formally recorded and being able for us to commence that investigation and provide any support to the victim at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you, Richie. Yeah, that's been a really helpful response, and the information came from a resident through the survey, so I will look to have that information sent to you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to question 4. When reporting to the police, it seems the operator is more interested in the caller's details than the details of what's been reported. When a report is accepted, the caller receives no feedback, so can only assume action by the police has been taken. How can the force ensure that they maintain communication with the caller regarding the outcome of a call when a crime is reported?
I think Andrew, I'm going to step in and help that, because that sort of falls again out slightly alongside the contact management piece into crime recording, which is an area of business that I have responsibility for. So I think Richie's already described the response arrangements that we have in place in terms of timeliness of response and the Thrive approach that we undertake within the control room when dealing with the assessment of those first incidents. And it's important, I think, to make clear at this stage is that there are national requirements upon policing to secure the information of callers in a particular way. There are rules that we have to adhere to in terms of how we gather information, not unlike data protection rules, but also specifically to enable us to inform the policing response and then also be able to report back to government our performance and the things that we've done in a certain area. It's important, I think, also to explain that when somebody who's in distress reports something to us, whilst the call handler might be focusing on getting the information of the member of the public in terms of their name, their address, their contact details, should the call be cut off or similar things so we can call them back, that incident has already been transferred to somebody who's sitting in the dispatch desk, and we're sending officers at that stage. So we almost don't really need to understand the detail of the call at the level of detail to enable us to make a decision on how we deploy. So it can often be the case that we've got a call handler who's taking information from somebody who might be reporting a really serious crime. And whilst they're gathering that information, and it might seem strange that we're asking for somebody's email address at that particular moment, but we've actually already got officers traveling to the scene, so the call handler doesn't necessarily need to gather that detailed information of the nature of the incident, because that's going to happen anyway. So that is all done in a structured way to make sure that we do gather all of the information that we're going to require. And of course, things like in the modern day, getting people's mobile phone numbers, any social media tags that they might have, their email addresses, help us then to make use of some of the technology that's been invested in, such as the Salesforce My Journey and Victim Portal pieces, so that future communication is done in a particular way. Now, depending on the circumstances of the incident, it might be that we can't share an update. We may well have dealt with a third party or made an arrest, and we're not going to disclose that information to anybody outside the ultimate need to know requirement in relation to that incident. But when an incident has been reported and it is a crime, then the investigating officer then takes that responsibility, whether it's a member of our new virtual investigation team, a detective, or a uniform officer who might be investigating the crime. And there always will be that feedback that comes as a consequence of crime. Now, we've talked a little bit already, haven't we, about the number of 101 calls and number of 999 calls which don't result in an incident. And we just do not have the capacity to ring everybody back. You know, for example, we do get people ringing us up. What time and what day am I going to get my bins collected? Well, we're going to hand that off to the local authority, but we're not going to ring them back to say, we've told the local authority to contact you. We've just been clear. And, you know, and 6 out of 10 of those incidents that get reported into the control room, and Joy's already mentioned the fact that we've got some of the biggest numbers of 101 calls per 1,000 population in the country. Many of those calls just patently shouldn't come to the police. So we haven't got the opportunity to use up more of our valuable resource time to go back and provide feedback on something which didn't pertain to policing in the first instance. But where somebody's reported a crime or where we've got a live antisocial behaviour investigation, those updates do come through, whether that be through the victim portal and victim journey tools, or alternatively through physical updates from officers when they've been allocated. Where we don't get to somebody in a reasonable time frame, we actually also have a dedicated member of staff in the control room who will ring people back. So if we can't get there within the 2 hours that we've suggested we would, in nearly all circumstances, we're ringing that member of the public back to say that we're really sorry, but we've been busy and other calls have taken priority, and we haven't been able to get to you as quickly as we can. We are improving that, and I think that, as Richie's described, that virtual investigation team function where we are all but guaranteeing a call back from a police officer within 24 hours of your crime report to be able to gather that information that's relevant to the crime investigation and give that feedback straight away that investigation will be subject to further work, or indeed it might well be closed. So we have recognised that there's a loop to be closed, and as Richie's described, we are closing that.
Thanks, Kevin. Really useful response there. Moving on to question 5, I reported an incident through the online reporting form and received an automatic response that I would be contacted with an update, but I never heard anything. So I still don't know what the outcome of my report was. How do you intend to address this to ensure it does not happen again? And I know you've already mentioned, obviously, in terms of when people ring up, I suppose the aspect of this question is in relation to the online reporting form.
So I think it's important to recognise that the online reporting form is a national tool, and our ability to influence the design of that form is limited. We have already put feedback in, and we are working with the provider of our command and control system, Sopra Steria, to work up more automated routes that sort of share information between the two systems to help smooth that process out. Ultimately, we send an acknowledgement within 2 hours of the report being made, and we review every one of those calls within that time frame. Where the report would justify either a crime to be recorded or a physical response, we treat that online report in just the same way as we would for somebody who's telephoned us, and you know that's an important safeguard and an important safety net, because we do get scenarios where people report very serious crimes through an online means, despite all of the warnings that are in place on the online form, right from the beginning of, is it happening now? And if you tick yes, it'll say ring 999. Does it involve a serious sexual offence or a matter of other gravity? And it will then say ring 999 or 101. But notwithstanding that, members of the public still go all the way through that process and report things online, which is not appropriate. But we recognise that it does happen, and as a consequence, we put measures in place to mitigate that. When those reports come in, we allocate them to an officer, and there's that assessment done against those Thrive principles, and it might well go into the virtual investigation team, or it might well be allocated to an officer for physical attendance at an early stage. The single online home system, with it being national, there are 46 different types of forms that people can fill out. Not all of them come into the force control room. Some will go to firearms licensing teams, and there will be an update in slower time, for example. Some for things like the online reporting of road traffic collisions, they will receive a slower time response if required, and there is no requirement to respond in all circumstances. And again, with the resource available to us and the importance of us being able to prioritize our activity, we aren't able to respond to all of those things, but we do feed back the importance of trying to design forms that better understand the customer needs. We will always see, we'll always take the opportunity to respond to individual requirements. And of course, if the report that's alluded to in the question, a bit like we've spoken about earlier, if that's fed back through, if we have made an error, then of course we'll go back, we'll apologise, and we'll rectify the issue. But it is sometimes it's a case that we aren't able to respond, individually to cases where there's no particular requirement for us to get back in touch with a member of the public. This is not particularly any different than if you were to ring up any other agency or private body seeking customer service. You wouldn't always get an acknowledgement other than the work that was required to be done in the background would have been completed.
Thank you, Kieran. And then moving on to the final question. Why, when I've made a call about a burglary crime that has happened, why do I get an appointment a week later?
Thanks, Andrea. I'll pick this one up. So I think there's probably covered off quite a few facets of this, but if I tie them into responding to the specific question. So when people do call into the control room, we do that Thrive risk assessment, which I explained, which really determines the response time that we would give to that type of instance. So take a burglary crime. If it's occurring now, or if the suspect's still nearby, officers would be dispatched immediately. So it would be one of those immediate responses that I spoke about. If it had maybe happened earlier and there was no immediate danger or no evidence that we needed to secure quickly, then it would be classified as one of those non-emergency incidents. So this is where we do have to triage and prioritise those most urgent calls. Of course, from a victim's point of view, that shouldn't then change their experience. It shouldn't change, how we then more widely investigate that particular crime. But obviously, we do have to prioritise those more urgent ones. So again, as we've referenced earlier about how those calls are logged, and then the report is reviewed by that virtual investigation team that we've been talking about. Excuse me, I've been talking a lot, haven't I? They'll create a crime record, and after speaking to the victim, we'll make a determination, as I referenced earlier, as to what level of visits required. We can do a huge amount now of remote evidence collection, so people can upload CCTV, photographs, things such as that to us direct. So it doesn't often need an officer to go out to get that with the use of technology that we've got. But of course, if a visit's needed, then we'll schedule it when an officer's available. So what we should see now with that virtual investigation team is that we'll have a quick contact with the victim. And if we are going to visit, then yes, it might be a short period afterwards, but we'll get much quicker immediate contact with our victims, as I've spoke about, and hopefully that'll give real benefit for victims by ensuring that we have that contact within 24 hours. We can get them all any level of victim support that they might need more widely, and enable us to determine the most appropriate response for them.
Thanks, Richie, and thank you for giving us such a comprehensive update, and also for the executive team for answering the questions as well, and demonstrating how this investment is delivering real results and, most importantly, the public's priorities. I really appreciate all this work's been a real team effort, from leadership buy-in and commitment to deliver what matters to the public, and most importantly, the teams responsible for turning our strategy into action on the ground. is really delivering the results. And I'm really, I have to say, I'm extremely grateful to all of them for helping us to make the improvements that make it easier and more accessible and convenient to report crime and antisocial behaviour. Before I conclude, Rachel, is there anything that you want to add just before I bring it to a close? It's fantastic support from your team, really putting all that work and effort into delivering the things that we've seen or heard online. But just if there's anything you want to add before I move on.
Thank you, Joy. Yes, I just really wanted to repeat how important it is to us and how we work tirelessly to be there when people really need us and to keep them safe. I do appreciate that some of the other contact with us we have to arrange when we're going to see people. I think people understand we're trying to get really effective at doing that so we don't mess people around, we keep them updated, but we really absolutely want to hear from people. We want crime reported, we want to know what's happening in our communities, and we want to protect you. So please do keep contacting us. You will find it's easier to get through. If your service is delivered by someone else, then we'll point you in that direction. Thank you, Joy.
Thanks, Rachel. As you say, it's a really exciting time for policing with the rollout of the Neighbourhood Policing Guarantee, which is well underway. And we're really fortunate to welcome recently the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, a few weeks ago to discover how this initiative is progressing locally. And I think really with your national lead, I think we're really ahead of the game on that and really keen to ensure that we do the best possibly we can on that area. And we really taken big steps to deliver a first-class service to victims as well and to the public, including our call handling operation. And at the heart of the guarantee is a simple but important message. Your police service is here for you, and we are all working exceptionally hard to listen, to learn and act to give services the personal touch that our communities desperately need to be safe. It's been really encouraging to see the sustained improvement in call handling, absolutely exceptional performance, despite the ongoing demand, as we've alluded to, and the pressures we've heard about today. We should never forget that the voice at the end of the phone can provide vital support in times of great stress and has a big impact on the caller's overall trust and confidence in policing. That's why call handling will remain an area of intense scrutiny within my office and why I will continue to work closely with the Chief Constable to build on our success. So thank you everyone for sending your questions in. Thank you for listening. That concludes today's meeting.
Thank you.